Good afternoon. It's always good to follow Dana on because, like, she's actually said an awful lot of the stuff I was going to say. But, hey, cool. So, I'm going to talk to you about what are the options around DIY. Hopefully, we'll get to my back at some point. Tim's linked into the back to pick up the right set of slides. It's much easier with pictures to talk to, honestly. Cool, thank you. So, the options. I'm going to talk about what are they, what options are out there, how have they progressed, which builds on one of the slides you've just seen. Using them offline and a bit about CGM, because everybody's talked about looping and people have talked about CGM, but it's important we just talk a little bit about CGM. So, just a little bit about me. I've been type 1 now for more than 30 years. I was actually diagnosed when I lived in this great city, so I spent quite a lot of time in the Western General, for those who know it, in Edinburgh. I've been a pump user now for more than 14 years, and I've been closed loop for closer to 2.5 years. And I enjoy some silly sports, so for those of you who don't recognise it, it's the Fastnet Rock, and that was going around in 2015 in the ocean race. So, slide you've pretty much seen. What are the components of a CG? What are the components of an open loop system, closed loop system? You've got a CGM. You've got an algorithm that sits in the middle and it's got a communication method. This picture shows loop. That then feeds an insulin pump. A couple of weeks ago I was using an Omnipod as part of a loop closed loop system. And there's also MyScout for cloud storage. But fundamentally, that's it. So each of those components you can get individually and you can build on. There are 3 systems out there, however. The one that Dana's using is OpenAPS, it sits in the middle. Its interface is either with the pump, or through a watch, or through MyScout itself. However, there are other options. It also uses old Medtronic pumps, and that's kind of a key point, especially this side of the Atlantic. Getting a hold of these Medtronic pumps, which were last made 11 years ago, that can communicate with these systems, is hard. For all the healthcare professionals in the room, put your hands over your ears, there is a black market out there for these pumps. Okay. Come to the left, Loop. It's used on the iPhone, and lots of people love it because of the user interface of the iPhone. It uses a little small device called a Riley link. It costs about $150. They're in hard supply at the minute because all of these people are ordering for use with Omnipod. I think they've seen more demand for them in the last month than they've had in the last 3 years for the Medtronic versions of them. And again, it can be used with the same old Medtronic pumps and Omnipod. That's the Eros, not the new Dash. Oh. Finally, the one that most people in Europe, I guess, most people in the UK use, I think 2/3 of loopers in the UK are using Android APS. And that's mainly because you can get hold of warranted pumps much more easily. So the Dana RS, the AccuCheck Combo, the Insight. Coming soon, the old Medtronic pumps and probably Omnipod following on as well. So it's probably the most flexible for those of us on this Atlantic. It's driven off an Android phone. So just some pictures of what are they and what are out there. You can see Apple Watch, iPhone, Riley link below it, and a pump. You've got to have a Mac though to build it, or build it on a virtual machine. You need to have a developer's license if you want it to last for more than a week. So that's to show you some of the costs around it. We've talked about the Riley link, a Medtronic pump, how much do they cost, or Omnipod, how much do they cost. Love it when people take pictures of the slides and I'll stand back out of the way so you've got a mod in there. OpenAPS, the original, runs off a very small microcomputer that's running Linux. You can't get a hold of the Intel Edison boards, which are the picture on the right-hand side there, but you can get a hold of a Raspberry Pi board fairly easily, fairly cheaply. They're great, it works, just means you've got to know a little bit more about coding or get used to coding in your head to make it happen. Costs there, again, kind of need a phone to be able to see the data and see what's going on with it. Finally, Android APS, again, yeah, Dana RS is the only one I've not played with it, hence the reason there's a picture of a phone showing it next to a Dana RS. But you can use it, essentially, Android phone. There's certain people have certain favourites in terms of phones and watches to use it with. This picture builds on the one that Dana actually used. It shows the algorithms coming through time. I'll say 2016 rather than 2015 Dana, just because it actually adds to the year-by-year increases. But it shows how the algorithms have progressed. It's probably worth having a think about, where do we think commercial systems are today? What maturity level would we put the commercial systems at? We'll probably find, 670G, level 3. Tandem pump coming soon with basal IQ, probably level 3. 2, 2.5. Some debate going on at the front there. Talked a little bit about insulin speed. So one of the things I found that improved my looping experience was actually using Fias, because it gets in quicker. The faster the insulin action, the better a closed loop system will work. Fias comes with its own challenges around using it, around sensitivity. So, go offline. As you saw, one of my loves is doing offshore sailing, so I like to be away from a mobile signal. Essentially, it means you need something that works away from a phone signal. You don't want to be talking to the internet to make it work. Pretty much, my view of the world is, they all do work, they all come with their own challenges. You always need to have a battery or something with you to keep them charged. But because Android APS has got the smallest number of components in the system, it sort of gets my bet as being the easiest for going offline. So why haven't I talked about CGM? Because CGM is one of the most important things in this whole loop. The reason I haven't really talked about CGM in here is because pretty much it doesn't matter what CGM you are using. As long as you know its constraints, as long as you know how to use it so that you're maintaining good calibration, you can pretty much use any CGM, be it on an Android or be it on an iPhone. It really doesn't matter. I think the key thing is actually understanding, because it's the thing that's driving your whole loop, you've got to actually keep it and look after it. So CGM is the most important thing, but pretty much anything goes. Usual round for those who want links to go and find stuff. And I shall leave it on that slide, and I'll pass it on to Tim to be able to do his one on living with looping. I'll just wait while everybody takes the pictures from the back. You can see the cameras out.
Okay then, so what you're getting here is an 8-minute version of what we did last weekend that took a whole day. So we're either going to go very, very fast, so you're not going to get quite as much information. So, what we often see when people post pictures of looping on social media is something that looks like this, which is a lovely flat graph. It's nicely timed in range, it looks great, and it's, for a substantial amount of the time, 88% roughly for me, that's what it looks like. However, it doesn't always look like that, and it is something worth bearing in mind, because sometimes it looks like that. As you can see there, there's a nice big high between sort of lunch and dinner time where my glucose levels are elevated, they wouldn't come down in spite of giving lots of extra insulin. You can see then in the evening it's going up and down in a fashion that is a bit like a little roller coaster. And all of these factors happen because there are other things going on as well as the loop. And that's why you need to know about CGM, about your pump settings, about how to deal with meal times, how to deal with exercise, and a bunch of other things as well. So, as Dana alluded to earlier, with CGM, If you put bad data in, you get poor results out, because obviously the loop is acting on the data that's going through it. So you have to be able to deal with that. And one of the most important things is calibration, because if you're calibrating a CGM system badly, so it's moving up and down fast, it's not got a long flat period behind it when you're doing this, you can put the algorithm that the system uses out and then cause it down the line a bit later on to not get good values. You also need to sense check a system that you're using, because as I mentioned, if your calibration's bad or there are things going on, you might find that the data you're getting out of it doesn't really match what your blood's doing. This is something that you have to bear in mind more with some systems than with others. For example, for a period of time I looped with a light going through the old 5 series Medtronic pumps, and that was never the most reliable of systems and had a tendency to drift quite a lot. And when it drifted, you kind of had to go, right, is it really working properly? Maybe I should do a fingerprint just to test it. So there are some factors there that you do need to bear in mind. And then another point, as you can see in this picture, is recognising noise, and that is where you can see that the glucose levels are dropping out according to the CGM. You can see that there are gaps in the data. All of this stuff that loop systems are designed to deal with, but you do need to be aware of what's going on with that and understand that if you see something like that, what to do with it. Now in this particular case, that's the end of life of a sensor, so who here would then change their sensor? Is that all? Would you just leave it in and then hope it got better? Because that would be probably quite risky. And that's the point about life cycle. If you look at the life cycle of a CGM sensor, a lot of people in the DIY world have a tendency, because it reduces the costs, to leave their sensors in for 14 days, 20 days. I think the longest anybody got was 86 days. Personally, I wouldn't want to loop with a sensor that was 86 days old, because it would be quite an interesting experience, I'm sure. So you do have to reassess how you're using a CGM system when you do start to use something like a DIY loop, because you don't really want to find yourself in a position where the data you're putting into it is something that can put yourself at risk. As Dana said, it's all done with a high level of safety integrated into the algorithms, but you do have to use some common sense about other areas of what you're working with. So the next point we talk about is settings, and as Dana said, auto-tune was developed to make this a bit easier. One of the key points here is the duration of insulin action. So can I have a show of hands? Who here is using a pump? Who here in your pump have the duration of insulin action or insulin action time set to 3 hours? Who has it set to 4 hours? Who has it set to 6 hours? Now, which of those of you who have got it set to 6 hours are looping? Right, there you go. Insulin takes more than 5 hours to get out of your body, and if you don't set it up correctly in your loop system, nothing will work properly because the system will snap insulin. Basal rates are another thing that are important. When we typically do this stuff manually ourselves using a pump, what we tend to do is one of two things. We either set the basal rate in our pump up so that it absorbs some of the food when we eat, or we set it up so that we underdo the basal rate and then compensate for that with our boluses with our meals. So the end result is actually that most of us who are using a pump when we first do this manually have our information wrong, and the result is that when you put that into a loop, it causes some interesting issues. And then we have insulin sensitivity. Now, as I mentioned previously, if you've got your basal rates wrong, then you've probably done the calculations around your insulin sensitivity and the follow-up to it, carb ratio, and got the wrong information there as well. And what you tend to see then is if your insulin sensitivity factor is set too strongly, you get this roller coaster effect, which is preceded by, in a loop situation, insulin being given. And that causes on and off effect of insulin. It causes the glucose levels to go up and down. And these are things that happen to everybody, or not everybody, but a lot of people when they first start using the loop. So getting these things right is important. And then, as I mentioned, the carb ratio. The carb ratio is also very important, because when you're using a bolus calculator or when you're using some of the other features that are in some of these systems, when you put that information in and you give yourself a bolus, you don't want it to be pushing you down too low afterwards. So these are actually critical factors in getting used to using one of these systems and learning how your body works and how the system works alongside your body. It's not something where you can just plug it in and it will work. There is some work required. And then we have meal times. A loop is not magic. It's very, very good. It makes a huge difference. And as Dana has said, insulin is mostly slow. Fias's a bit better, but it's mostly slow. So when it comes to how you use these systems, you do have to understand that you still need to bolus, you still need to give yourself insulin, especially given the lead time that's in place. And as Dana mentioned again, eating soon. Now, this is something you can do without the loop. What it's doing is deciding to give yourself a small amount of insulin further ahead of the meal. That can either be by a TBR or via a small bolus, to allow it to be in your body and circulating before you actually eat. So that when you do a mealtime bolus, probably not soon enough before the meal, early enough before the meal, you've got some insulin on board and it helps to ameliorate the high levels that people often see after eating. What we're finding now is that healthcare professionals are starting to suggest using this technique to their patients as a useful way of helping to manage to strike the spike. It actually is effective regardless of whether you're using MDI or whether you're using a loop. And it's well worth thinking about how this works, and at the end of this session, or the end of the day, going away and looking up eating soon and learning a little bit more about it, because it really can help. And finally, there's carb absorption. Carbs don't always get absorbed instantly, and food has these funny profiles that do all sorts of things to you. Who here enjoys bolusing for a pizza? Yeah, that's always the fun one, isn't it? So this is one area where loops can really, really help, because when you've got something that keeps on giving in terms of how it pushes glucose levels up, the loop understands that there's carbs on board, it understands that this is going on, and can actually give you insulin alongside that happening and manage to keep you from having that overnight high of like 15 because you forgot that it was a pizza and therefore you forgot that you needed to bolus 3 times over the course of 8 hours. And that's other long-acting foods in there as well. So there's a lot of other factors. It's not just about plugging it in and turning it on. Meal times do come into play. And then we have exercise. Now, we all know that exercise is fun. We all know it can be quite hard, and that if you're doing an aerobic exercise, so you're going for a run, you're cycling, it tends to push your glucose levels down. If you're going to do something like sprinting or martial arts or weightlifting, it tends to cause your glucose levels to spike. And if you're doing something like playing football or hockey, then, well, who knows? We've all experienced that. What loops do is they give you some techniques to enable you to manage that more effectively. Now, if you use a pump, I hope you put a TBR on before you, temporary basal rate, for those who aren't using pumps, before you start exercising, probably an hour before, to reduce the amount of insulin in your body. But if you're using a loop, you do need to do something similar, because, as we've mentioned already, insulin is slow. The time it takes to act is slow. So you do have to take manual actions in order to better the outcomes that come about. So you set activity targets before exercise. This is the equivalent of doing a low temporary basal rate. But then, after exercise, you also still have to have a higher target or a to give you effectively a lower temporary basal rate, because of the effects of exercise on insulin sensitivity. At the moment, none of the DIY systems or any of the commercial systems can manage any of this stuff and detect how it's working. Given some of the tools within OpenAPS and within Android APS looking at insulin sensitivity, there are things that help there, and there are some other factors that I know people in the audience have spoken to me already about that potentially allow a loop system to determine that somebody has exercised and then manage the post-exercise sensitivity more effectively. But some of this stuff are things that you will, even if you are using a closed loop, need to pick up on and use. And then we have other factors. Site failures, as I showed you in that first slide, they happen. You can't do much about them. You have to work out how to deal with them. Persistent highs, those aren't necessarily site failures, but there are other things. And of course, hypos. What do you do when you have a hypo with a loop? How do you handle it? What should you do? So I think to summarise it, living with a loop makes type 1 diabetes a lot easier. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But it doesn't take it away. And at the moment, it can't fully automate living with it. So you do have to consider that there are things you need to do. And most importantly, when you're using one of these systems, some common sense is required. At the moment, you're used to using common sense when you use MDI to give yourself a bolus before you're going to exercise, or when you're going to go to bed. Do you give yourself a huge amount of insulin beforehand? Probably not. So some of these factors are still there with a loop, and you do need to make sure that when you're looping, you remember that. It hasn't taken your type 1 away, it's not a cure, but it does make it a hell of a lot easier. So with that, moving on to the Q&A. So are we not doing Q&A? Okay, we're going to take Fraser.
This is for Dana. So the supported pump is going to disappear sooner or later. So what's going to be the future of OpenABS?
Okay, can you hear me? Nope. Try this one. Yes. Third, emergency backups is my motto. So when I travel, I have a backup rig, a backup pump, backup microphones. So the future, I think, is continuing to automate away a lot of the noise and solve a lot of the problems. One of the things Scott, my now husband and co-developer, and I do is really look at what behaviors am I doing to kind of compensate it for the pains of diabetes. That's where things like AutoSense and AutoTune came out of, recognizing where I was having to do a lot of work and I shouldn't be doing it. So continuing to make it as seamless as possible for real life, and also looking at interoperability and making sure also that people can choose the features they want in the system that they want and whatever interface that they want to do. There's a lot we can do in terms of hardware and pumps and interoperability with different displays and devices, but what we also want to do is research what exists today and bring that research forward to regulatory bodies, to healthcare providers, to help everybody feel comfortable with what it is the DIY community is doing. And then we may have evolutions of the algorithm that allow us to do even more. If you had asked me even 2 years ago, right before we figured out the super micro boluses, I wouldn't have expected that I would be now saying almost 2 years no bolus. I didn't think that was possible. So I think we'll continue to be surprised by what we learn as a community together. There's a question back there. Thank you, Fraser, for running.
Have any of the manufacturers offered to collaborate with you to move the whole thing forward?
So we've had, as a community and as individuals in the community, have had lots of conversations with manufacturers over the years. Several of them have not only listened to our requests, kind of how they do focus groups, user groups, but some of them have gone a step further and actually looked at the code and the features in the community, run simulations, tested it in their system, and there's going to be systems rolling out to market, probably in the second generation of commercial systems, that are actually using some of the code and ideas from the DIY world. So that makes me, as one of the original creators, really happy, because that was the goal. It was never about DIY for everybody. I mean, that's great. Anybody who wants to do it should be able to do it, but it's also about helping the commercial manufacturers have better products and bring them to markets and more markets sooner. So we are starting to see headway. For any of the companies in the room, consider this yet another open invitation. We're always happy to collaborate. Any of us, I think, would be happy to say that and happy to have conversations in any country in the world.
And to add to that, of course, Surreal, who made Dana RS, collaborated with the guys from Android ABS to make their pump work really, really well with that. And we've had a couple of other manufacturers who have approached us to talk about how they can make it possible to allow interaction over Bluetooth so that they can design their Bluetooth spec to make it more effective.
Thank you. So I have a question: is OpenAPS gonna, or other plans to make it compatible with Dana RS? And then also, when I saw the name Dana Rise for the first time, seeing as it's geared towards DIY, I had serious doubts whether they had named after you. Is that the case?
No, I have no affiliation, association, or anything to do with Swiel, the company who happens to, for decades, they actually named a pump the Dana pump before I was born. So it has nothing to do with me. It's now just kind of ironic that they happen to be the company that had a Bluetooth pump and reached out and worked with the community, which is great. In terms of making it compatible with OpenAPS, you're kind of talking about making it compatible with a rig. Somebody could work on a driver for it, but for the most part, it's probably going to work more with Loop and Android APS via the phone interface, just because it's a little bit easier. We did this because this is what works. It doesn't require a phone, but most people tend to want a phone interface, so it'll be the phone interfaces that tend to be compatible. But my plea to you, to help cut down on confusion, is to say Dana R or Dana RS when you talk about the pump online instead of Dana's pump or the Dana pump, because that gets really confusing for me.
Hello, I've been looping for a year now, and the success is incredible. I've reduced my HBM to 6% from 8%, and all three of you have helped me at some point during that. There'll be people in this room who were where I was a year ago, just over a year, and feeling that the learning curve is really steep, things like the acronyms and the various documents to be read through. And I wondered if you had any advice for anybody in the room who's this is their first research into looping, because it's really intimidating. I remember that feeling well. Thank you.
So I think the big thing is there's lots and lots of good documents out there online. The slide I had up there that showed all the guides to looping, go read the documents, and when you've read them again. The community's out there, a lot of us will help online, but you do sort of sometimes see the 50th question of the day, which is the same question coming round again.
And of course we can put another plug in here for Dana's book. That's probably the first place to start. If you're considering this, you're wondering what it's all about, go there. It's written in a way to make it easy to pick up and start to understand, and then that can take you through where you need to go next, what you need to do next to pick it up and get going. It's definitely worth doing it like that.
And I would just emphasize, there is no stupid question in our community. It might be the 50th same question, and that is okay if it's the first question for you. But if somebody gives you a link, that usually means that something's been written and revised and written again. And it's fine to come back and say, I read that, but I don't understand it. Totally valid. But just if you ever see somebody give you a link in response to a question, and you're wondering, like, why did they just give me a link that seems kind of unfriendly? That is just because it's been written. That link will probably answer your question, but if not, feel free to come back and ask. Because one of the beautiful things about the closed loop community is the code, the documentation, and everything, including the book, are all open source, which means that they have been updated over time by many, many people. Because we all learn very differently. There's videos, there's written documentation, there's different levels of details in the guide. Some people get it at a high level, some people want more focus in different areas, and the questions you ask also help us make the documentation better. So don't feel shy about asking in one of the groups, but again, don't be shy if you get a link back as well if it's been documented before.
This is actually less a question, more just a heartfelt thanks really, because following on from this point, I've been looking at this sort of community for a while, like lurching in social media and actually meeting people and seeing it live. That was what drove me to go on a pump. My son had a chest infection. The doctor treating him asked me what my health, and I said, I was type 1 diabetic. She said, oh, you're on a pump. And I got speaking about a pump. That took me down that route, and I feel actually having that sort of meeting and seeing it live rather than remotely is going to be the motivation to help me go down that route. So just a heartfelt thank you.
And I would actually, and if anybody doesn't mind, as a way to just connect, there's a lot of loopers in the room. If you're comfortable identifying yourself as somebody who's looping, just so you can see friendly faces in the audience you can talk to later today, would you mind raising your hand if you're a looper? Great, so please, be plenty of people to ask questions of and make new friends. So just know that there's a lot of people and a lot of resources out there. Thank you for that.
And just to add to that, looking at the faces and hands that have gone up, you've got people running all three different systems in the room. So if you're looking for any of the individual ones, and you ask, I'm sure we can point you to people.
in the interest of keeping to time, I've been given one job, so I should try and do it properly. I'll draw close to the question and answer, but obviously everyone's going to be here at the coffee break and afterwards, so come and speak to people. Everyone's friendly. And I think we've got the video to go up now, hopefully, fingers crossed.
You have to come now. Woo-hoo! So now I've got type 1. Woo-hoo! I need to get you kind of fun. Woo-hoo! I'll think that on my phone. We're CGM, so mom said that we're gonna buy one. So we put night scout, a pint of carton about, because I'm looping the DIY thing.